Well, hey, Nanisa Nithawak, Nanana, Ani Nan. Hello, I'm Sean Chandler. From the White Clay people, and I'm the president of Aaniiih and Nakoda College. And I'm here today to do another uh, elder interview for our Aaniiih and Nakoda College President's Elder Series. And the purpose of these talks or these lectures is to give our students the opportunity to learn and be inspired by our Aaniiih and Nakoda elders. We would like to share stories of our elders in terms of the practice of their Indigenous life ways, education, successes, and successes as they encountered the good or the bad or negative challenges of their life experience. Traditional stories, ceremonial, and spiritual knowledge may be shared, but regardless of that topic um, that may arise during this, there will be this common thread that Indigenous lifeways were the foundation that they needed to become prosperous and generous. So today's interview, uh, we're honored to have Dr. Deborah His Horse's Thunder, who is a Nakota elder and a longtime leader in education. And I'm glad to have been supervised by her when she was academic dean here at Aaniiih Nakoda College. So with that, I welcome Dr. His Horse's Thunder, and maybe you could introduce yourself a little bit.
Thank you, Sean. Hamidaki Wigiana Inchinashi, Hekta, Deborah, His Horse's Thunder. Amaa Nakota, Wadopana Oyate. I greet you all as relatives. I tell you my name is Thunderbird, who stands up for herself. And I am a Nakota, and I was actually raised among the canoe paddler band, which is my father's band, and of the Assiniboines. And I'm really honored to join this prestigious group of people that you are interviewing. There's a point in time when you think, oh, right, I do qualify as an elder as according to age, whatever that age demarcation is. But it's truly an honor to join you with this, Sean.
Yeah, we're honored to have you. So we'll get started with some questions, and we may go off on tangents, but that's all right in this setting. So to begin with, where were you born, and also where did you grow up at?
Okay. I was born at the famous Fort Belknap Hospital, which is just down the road from you. I was born there, and we were living in Lodgepole at the time of my birth, and so we went back. My mother took me back, and we were living with my uncle Andrew Gray. I'm a member of the Gray family. We have lots of relatives there. My brother Lauren has a home in Lodgepole at the very spot where I was spent the first year of my life, and then we moved to Fort Peck with the Wadopana people. My father was from there, and we used to go back to Lodgepole a lot. I mean, I used to have a lot of baby pictures of me outside in the snow and different things out there in Lodgepole. But we used to go back and forth between Fort Peck and Fort Belknap a lot, primarily for ceremony, not just to visit family, but also to participate in various ceremonies. So we were back and forth throughout my childhood.
All right. And well, since you brought up the ceremonial life, could you describe the atmosphere at that time? Uh, what was it like back then when you see? For me, I see in my search for history and all of that stuff, I see photos of what it was like, and see these big time, what I like to say, big time players in our ceremonial life. And I don't know what that was like. And so, what was the atmosphere like at that time?
It's interesting because, it wasn't until 1978 when the Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed. So this is back in the 50s and 60s. And it didn't occur to me till later on that most of our ceremonies were held at night. And as was shared with me, and we currently have hand games that are pretty they're still active, and it's different from what they call the feather game or the moccasin game and some of the other guessing games that other tribes have. And as my aunt explained it to me, she said, we had to we couldn't hold our ceremonies during the day. We had to hold them at night so that other people, meaning the BIA people and others that frowned on us practicing our ways, so that they wouldn't know about it. And even our medicine lodge or sundance, as some people refer to it, even that had to be held in secret. My great grandfather, enemy killer or nosy, was one of the last ones early on, before it was completely shut down, was one of the early ones that held sundance there on the Fort Belknap Reservation. So everything had to be done in secret or risk punishment. And so even our sundances took on different forms. The elements of the ceremony continued on, but in a different public presentation, I guess is the way to put it. So with our hand game ceremonies, people had hand game bundles, and within our communities, we all knew who these people were. And so when it was time to have ceremony, they would send the word out, send tobacco out and stuff, and bring people forward and invite them. When my oldest son was born, my mother hosted a hand game at Lodgepole for me and my son, because I was so young, and she really, and this was her first grandchild, she really wanted protection for us. She wanted us to have a good life and stuff. So she hosted a hand game, and it was about the prayers, the blessings, communicating with the spirits, our ancestors, to maintain that protection. So things were a lot different. It was all about being within the Indian community. And in fact, Sean, as I think about this, it's even to the point where, as I went to school, I went to a public school, and it was like leaving my Indianness at the door. And so, whoever I was as a Native person, I had to kind of put that aside as I walked in that school door. And I had to adapt to do what I was supposed to do, or try to extract whatever it was, the experience, the knowledge that was something I needed, or I was told that I needed. But it was really truly living in two separate worlds. We had our Indian world, and we were never told not to talk about it, but it was just there. We just didn't talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know what you mean by that, leaving something at the door when you go into, I remember, my family, we would go to different things during my youth. And, we lived, as we lived in Glendive, and you have that big rush of pride, or whatever that is, that big feeling you have attending these things. And then it slowly felt like it diminished and diminished as I got closer to Glendive and home, and then to school. Yeah, then it was felt like it was gone. It was there inside, but like you said, you had to kind of like cut it off a little bit to attend school or do whatever.
Yeah, you just simply suppressed it. It just kind of went internal, and then you had this exterior exterior presence
Yeah.
that was, I guess, quote, normal, unquote, in that other context, the non-native world environment.
Yeah. And we're thankful for those individuals that kept those ceremonies going and kind of went underground. And it's amazing they did it. And they're more than anybody.
I mean, that's so true. And I remember all when I was going through, when I did leave home and I had going to school and stuff and coming back, it was always so important for me to come home and bring my children with me to participate. And I remember so many times thinking, if it wasn't for the sacrifices being made by my relatives to continue these ways, we would be basically brown white people.
Yeah.
I mean, I made a choice to go to school. My relatives made a choice to continue to learn those ways, and without them, we wouldn't exist as a people. And so everyone made sacrifices. We just have to honor and respect the kinds of sacrifices that we all made.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we wouldn't have Aaniiih and Nakoda College here if it wasn't for them. And we made this this little arbor, the arbor on campus.
Right.
That was made to represent those people that did go underground and suffer in all those ways so that we could have these things today. So, but getting back to your schooling, where did you go to school?
Oh, I went, of course, I went to school on the Fort Peck Reservation, a public school. I would start school, and then when job opportunities came up as a family, we would move. So, we would, and I've also moved between schools on the reservation. I would go to school in, say, Fraser, which is on Fort Peck Reservation. Then I'd transfer into Wolf Point, if the, and it's probably primarily because of the housing conditions, the weather conditions. We were very impoverished. We didn't have electricity until I was about 12 or 13 years old in our home. And there wasn't indoor plumbing until I left home. But anyway, so I would go back and forth to school, and then sometimes we would leave. We would go to, we went to Eugene, Oregon, and spent a portion of the school year because of employment. Came back, and then went back. Ended up going to Klamath Falls one season, and then came back. Went to Las Vegas, Nevada, and lived for a while. So all of those school experience, because I went to school wherever we were. And then as I look back and I thought, my first 8 years of education, I never went to school for a full year in one school. And as I think about it, what that really taught me is how to be adaptable. Because when you're a new kid in school, and you fortunately, I'm the oldest of 10, so I always had brothers and sisters that were also on this journey with me in terms of different kinds of schools that we went to. But it really taught me to be adaptable and to be flexible, not walking into a school and being the new kid, and how do you make friends right away? How do you, enter into these cliques that they're always there in the schools, in schools among kids. So that was one of the really benefits of that. It taught me not to be afraid to enter a new situation, to sit back and observe and figure out what kind of place I could make for myself in that context. So I went there, and so we'd spend school years back and forth and things. But during the summers, and I just want to share this a little bit about my grandmother. My grandmother is Esther Wojciech Gray Waxlow. She was married to Oscar. She was born Wojciech. She's married Oscar Gray, and then when he passed away, she married Waxlow. Temperature Waxlow. Anyway, so she would come live with us in the summers, because my uncle Andrew and Aunt Jenny Gray, they would do attend powwows and different events during the summer. And she was an elderly woman. She was real short. She's probably, of course, because of her age, she was probably, oh, if she was 5 foot, that would have been on a tall day, I think it was. And she was round. She wore the traditional cloth dress that I think my aunt made for her, and she'd wear this big leather belt around her waist. And when she would come stay with us, she was the other thing that happened to her when she got married really young, in a traditional way. I think she was like 14 or 15 when she was married. And when she was 16 years old, the Indian Health Service at Fort Belknap, one of the doctors said that she had cataracts in her eyes, and she had real light eyes. She was lighter complexion, and she had light colored eyes. And the doctor decided that those were cataracts, and took her and said she needed to have surgery, and so operated on her and blinded her. I mean, she actually blinded her. She could see kind of shapes and stuff, but really couldn't function by herself. And so when she came to us, when she blessed us with her presence during the summers, it was really good because she would always engage with us. I mean, we'd be out. We used to all pretend powwow. We used to all, as kids get together and somebody would sing and we'd all be dancing, and she would join in and she would, sing or tease us or something like that. And because she was all round, we loved teasing her, because if we could get her laughing, we knew that her whole belly would shake. She'd be just laughing hard. Her whole tummy would be just shaking. And she only spoke a few words of English. And so it was what Nakota I've learned has been predominantly from her, because we had to understand what she wanted, when she needed something or needed to, whatever, in order to meet her needs and to try to communicate with her, we had to use what English she knew and what Nakota she taught us. And so that was a really, it's a really good memory to think about the time that we spent with her. But let's see. I was going to share something else with you. Let's see. Oh, the other thing, when I was going to school, early on, my mother used to really respect my decisions. So even though I may have been in 5th grade, for example, or 6th grade or something, and if I didn't want to go to school that day, my mother would ask me, "Are you going to go to school today?" And I said, "No, I'll need a note." And she'd say, "Okay." And I'd stay home. It's as I think back about that, she really respected the kinds of decisions that I made as an individual. It's like I was a human being capable of making decisions very early on. And as I think about that, what that taught me was I could make decisions. I always had options, and I could make the decision, but I had to live with that decision, whatever the consequences. I couldn't say, "Oh, my mother wouldn't let me," or anything like that. It was just something that was instilled in me, that I could make decisions, but I also knew I had to accept any consequences. And so I went to grade school, and when I was 14 years old, I fell in love with my very first boyfriend, and then we decided we were going to get married. Again, remember, I'm used to making these decisions, and I recall going to my mother and saying, he and I went to her and said what we wanted to get married. And I can remember that the look on her face was, it would, I guess now I interpret it as probably just distress about what was the best thing to do, what was the best course of action. Here's this little 14-year-old who thinks she knows everything and is wanting to make this decision. And I had to go to her because legally, you know, she had to give permission, and she did give permission. She gave permission. She respected what I wanted to do, and you know, of course, it resulted in me not going to high school. We ended up going to California. That was the place, one of the places to go for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, because my husband needed to go to school. He needed to have employment. He needed to get some training and stuff. And so he went to a auto mechanics program in Los Angeles. And so we moved there. We ended up living there for about 4.5 years. When he went to training, then went to, they found him a job, not in auto mechanics, mind you, but the BIA helped find him a job as a welder of all things. But anyway, he worked there, and the cost of living was such that we couldn't just live on what he made. So I ended up going to work. I started working when I was 15 with a baby, you know, was able to find childcare for my oldest son, and ended up working there with first just as a waitress, and then I ended up taking this test to go work for the telephone company. And I remember that was probably an encouraging sign, because they were really surprised at how well I tested, given that I didn't have the education from high school. And so it was in, I returned to Montana with 3 babies, ages 4, 3, oh yeah, just almost 3, and a newborn baby. And I was divorced then. So there I am, and I'm 19 years old with 3 little babies. And when I went to my mother to ask her permission to get married, she asked me, she said, I want you to make me a promise. This is all I'm going to ask you. I want you to promise me that you will finish your education. Now, she didn't say finish high school. She said, I want you to finish your education. Now, in my little 14-year-old mind, that just meant high school, because I had no knowledge about anything beyond high school. So when I returned from California, my mother was working for the Head Start program at the time, and they were really pushing the GED programs, you know, because so many of us Native people just didn't finish high school, even under different circumstances. People were not finishing school, and so they were really pushing GED, which is to be an equivalent to a high school education. So she said, you go take this test. And so I did. I went, took the test, and passed it, got my GED. And at the time, it was like, oh, I finished my education, you know, with the GED. And I was then hired as a paraprofessional. There was a new program designed for the social service, the state social service agencies and the voc rehab to work together to try to help those folks, those families that were like what they saw long-term dependent on welfare. So how do we really do some intensive training or therapy or whatever was needed to help them get jobs? That was the intent of the program. So I was the paraprofessional. I would go out with the professionals, the caseworkers, and help them be comfortable with our families and stuff. And then I would help transport families and things. But the person that was the head of that, one of the people that was, one of the caseworkers, was a woman by the name of Marlene Sowie, now Marlene Sowie Kindness. She was the first Native person, actually she was the first person I ever worked with a college education. And so she's the first person, Native person that I knew with a college education. And she was so encouraging. You know, first she told me what college was. I had no idea that, you know, there was these things beyond high school. So she explained what college was, and she graduated from the University of Montana, and she wanted, she was one of the early First Native people to graduate from there. There was a little cadre of people that started school at the university in the 60s, and she was one of those individuals. So she had graduated, and the university decided they were trying to recruit her back so she could help teach in the School of Social Work. And she was like, "You should go too." And it's like, all right. And I applied, and I was actually accepted. And so she went to teach, and I went with my 3 babies. At that time, my oldest was 5 years old. And so we all, the 4 of us, went to Missoula, and I really credit being able to be so adaptable because of my early grade school experiences. And so I went to the University of Montana and started working towards a social work degree, as well as taking sociology classes, which I found really, really fascinating. But it also helped me, again, going back to the promise I made my mother, I started working towards, fulfilling that promise. And when I went to the University of Montana, that was in the 70s, the early 70s, and there was probably the highest number of Native people in college that year, or during that time. Part of it was a number of our people had gone to the military and come back, and there was the GI Bill, but also the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And I don't know any of the nuances of why suddenly the Bureau of Indian Affairs was really helping Native students go to college versus trade schools, which had been pushed before. Elmer Maine from Fort Belknap, God rest his soul and God bless him on the other side. But he was so, he was one of us. He was a Native, his Aaniiih, well known on Fort Belknap. But he was so helpful, so supportive. I remember and he'd always make his campus visits, and so he'd visit with us all. There was a little house for Indian studies there, and we'd all gather there. And he would sit there and he would visit with us, and we'd always ask him about my children, how are your children doing? And in those days, the BIA would give you a lump sum at the beginning, and it was still the quarter system, at the beginning of the quarter. And so you had to plan out, you had to, plan for three months or so. And a lot of times we weren't used to getting that much money all at once. And so it was kind of crazy times. There was a term called you got your BIA car, which a few people would take their school money, and if they decided to leave school, they would, buy transportation. But it was a good time. There were people like, just at Fort Belknap, as I think about people that were there at the college, at the university, Jack Plumage, our former tribal chairman. There was Wes and Steve Stiffarm. Wes has passed on, but Steve, they were both in college. My cousin Emery Gray, thank goodness for him. He was there. He and Judy Gray, his wife, were students there, and he was he would always kind of show up and give me really good advice, even when I didn't know I needed it. He would whisper in my ear, "You should do this," and so very, very helpful. Bernard Azure, and he had a brother, Jonathan. There was all these Native people, and people got involved in what they call the Kiayo Indian Club, which is still going on today. And I remember Jack was the president of Kiayo at the time, and he just he really pushed everybody to get involved in more than just our little group, our Indian things. I remember him getting everybody involved in a road race, and we were like, a lot of us weren't we hadn't been running or training for this, and so it was quite a feat for people to do that and to be successful, and just getting involved in things with the city council, or just he really pushed for us to get involved into doing different things. But it's interesting because the fact that I did not go to high school came, and it actually turned out to help me. Not that I would advise anybody to take that route, but it always felt like I had this 4-year gap in my education, and everybody else had gone to high school, and so everybody knew more than me. Everybody was way smarter than me, and so the result was that I studied really hard. I mean, it was like, if I read whatever the instructor said was required, and if the instructor said something about supplemental readings, or had other readings, kind of, if you chose to read it, it would be helpful. I would read everything. Even as a child, I was an avid reader, but I was so certain that if I didn't, that I had to read it. I had to read everything because everybody was so much smarter. So it's like trying to catch up, always trying to catch up. But that process of reading everything, it became a habit. It became part of who I am. And so anytime I sit down to do a project, I have to read as much as I can. I remember my children commenting on that, in terms of how many books do you have to read to write a paper, or things. But and the other thing that I felt I was really fortunate to be able to do was to take my children with me, particularly to college classes. They knew how to behave in public, so they weren't getting up and running around or anything like that. So they would, and especially my youngest son, he, I think he put probably logged in as much college time as some college students, because I would take him with me. We would go to class. I'd take things for him to be busy with. So I was really able to keep my children engaged with what I was doing, as well as what other Native families, the Native students, when we had gatherings and stuff, we would bring our children together. So yeah, that's my education through I graduated from the University of Montana with a degree in sociology, bachelor's degree in sociology.
And then where did you get your master's at?
Oh, after I finished, after I got my bachelor's degree, Robert Swan, along with Jack Plumage, Robert Swan being from a Chippewa Cree from Rocky Boy, was also working at the university. And when Jack Plumage also graduated and he came back to become tribal chair, he recruited Bob Swan to come and start the tribal education department. So I was working there, and I had the very best experience, because I was hired as a curriculum developer to work with the elders. And so I got to sit with elders and hear their stories, and then write them up. And I worked with Preston Stiffarm at the time, and we would put these stories together, and some of them we printed up, others went to the Northwest Indian Labs for them to print. But it was during that time, a woman by the name of Dr. Robbie Farron. Actually, I think she had a law degree. She was Esquire, Robbie Farron. She was working at the Montana State University, and she came to the tribal education department, recruiting people who might want to go to graduate school, who might want to work on a master's. And it was, it really spoke to me because when I found out when I started working as a curriculum specialist, that my writing skills were not the level I needed them to be. I was struggling, even though I completed college, I had a bachelor's degree, I still struggled in trying to write well. And so I thought, well, if I go to graduate school, I will have to, and I did, you have to learn how to write, because there's so many papers that are required. Robbie Farron is a Lakota, and she ran a program. It was actually funded under the Title IV Education Act. And so it was a scholarship program. And so I started, and it was a funded for a specific period of time. And so I started in the summer. It was supposed to be a 2-year program. And she told me, Deborah, funding's going to run out. If we don't get refunded, you're not going to be able to finish. If you can't take 2 years. You can go this summer, you go this academic year, and you finish up next summer. So in 2 summers and an academic year is all I had to finish my master's program. And with her help and the help of more wonderful Native people who are colleagues that I worked with, I was able to get my master's degree, and it was in higher education, adult and higher education, which was really what I wanted, because I was actually working in adult education when I was working at Fort Belknap. My thought was I would return home and work. So I wanted to further my skills. But as it turned out, I ended up taking a job with Montana State University, Eastern, it used to be called Eastern Montana College. I became the Indian Careers Services Director. And, I worked with all the Native students to provide them whatever help I could to help them get through college.
Yeah, and I think that's when because I grew up. My mom was always involved in education too, so that's where I started to. I was just this quiet guy wandering with her or going around with her. I think that's when I met you or knew of you, that you worked at Eastern, and it's interesting too. She credits you for helping her go back to get her bachelor's degree. Up to that point, throughout the 70s and 80s, she just had that 2-year from Haskell, and she built a long career at Dawson. And but now you have your master's, and you were making a good career for yourself. What made you go back to get your doctorate?
As I worked at the college, so I'm in a mainstream university, and as I advocated for Native students to help them be successful. I worked with the students, but every so often, a little more often than I choose to remember, but faculty would come to me, or I would go approach faculty on behalf of a student, and I would hear things like, well, how many grandparents does this person have? They've already gone, to 2 funerals, and it was just over and over. There was so many different kinds of situations where there was just a difference in how, in our worlds, what and it was all non-Native faculty, just had no clue about Native people. And so even trying to advocate, trying to explain, trying to do all these things, I was really frustrated. That was part of it. The other part was there was a lot of issues. We are our home environments. There's the history there in terms of historical trauma, poverty, all of these things. And we come into a city such as Billings, that doesn't leave us. We have it with us. And when students would come to me and start sharing their stories, I felt really I lacked the skills to really provide them the kind of counseling that they needed. I would refer, I had made friends with a couple counselors in the Billings area that I felt were really good, you know, that had that cross-cultural ability to work with Native students. And so I would refer people to them, but they wouldn't go. They would come back to me and they would want to share more. And I just really felt inadequate. And so I was looking at the needs of the students, but also that frustration with the faculty, feeling like being on the student service side. And in higher education, you know that there's a difference between the faculty, the academics, and the student services, you know, and that there's a power differential or perceived power differential. And so I thought, well, if I can go back to school, earn a doctorate, and start teaching, I could help change it kind of from the inside is really what I was thinking. And so I applied to a graduate program in counseling at the University of Montana, and they accepted me. And so I had saved up money because there at that level there wasn't any scholarship monies per se. There are some now, but during that period there really wasn't any money. So I would save as much as I could, and I would go to school for a couple semesters, and then I would have to go back to work. And so I did that off and on, and I found I couldn't go. I either had to work full time, I tried, but I couldn't go to school part time. The way I guess I am. I'm full force in school or full force at work. And so even I tried a couple times, but I just didn't feel like I could do justice to both. And so I would work again for a while, save as much money as I could, then pay my tuition, and go to school as long as I could. So I kind of went back and forth a bit until I eventually graduated with a degree in counseling, and then worked towards becoming a licensed counselor. You know, and through all of that, there's oftentimes I was the only Native in the room, you know, because these are mainstream institutions, and that just isn't going to go away. You know, we until we can get more people educated, more people going through those jumping those hoops in order to sit at the table, we find ourselves, or at least I found myself, having to advocate for Native people throughout my professional life. You know, it's just one of those realities that are required. But yeah, I was able to successfully complete my doctorate. I did counseling on a volunteer basis for a while because I also needed to be licensed as part of the job requirements. I taught at the University of Montana. I served as a teaching assistant and then became a faculty member and assistant professor there. You know, and I guess I'm really proud of the fact that I was instrumental in the fact that while I was there, I was able to assist in developing a grant application that was successful to recruit and pay the tuition and expenses of other Native students so that they could get master's degrees or doctorates if that was what they were choosing to do.
That's such a, you know, your stories, you know, it's a great story for our students and our community that you showed, you know, you start somewhere, and you know, the challenges in your life and what you learned early on to be adaptable to your surroundings and to become successful. And I think you know, this story is going to benefit our young people and our students, and I hope they really come away with the inspiration that that I gained from you too. And you know, just things that we go through, we think it's whatever challenges we have, I um, think it's insurmountable. But you know, we look to our elders. Well, what did you go through? You know, you're successful. You think, you know, we think that, well, it must have been easy to get there, and it wasn't. And we all start somewhere. And I thank you for sharing your story. And
Yeah.
what are your plan? What are you doing now? Your plans?
Well, I'm the I set up my own consulting company back in 2006, um, and it's really a company that builds on my education and experience. And my I guess my whole purpose in life has been to try to give back, try to help. And when I first started college, tribal colleges didn't exist. They, you know, they, well, I guess the Navajo people were working at putting together a tribal college, but they didn't exist like they do now. Well, not by any means. And so my options were to go to a mainstream university. But after with the establishment of tribal colleges, I'm just passionate about the opportunities that tribal colleges present to Native people. You know, the idea that we can actually have an educational institution that teaches from, you know, our own worldview, and so that we're not, you know, that other people don't have to live in those mainstream institutions that where faculty have no clue about the realities of our students. And so I have been a strong advocate and worked on behalf of tribal colleges since since I left the teaching job at the University of Montana. I probably could be retiring from there at this point if I chose to stay. But I left to go to Haskell Indian Nations University as an administrator. I actually, after being a faculty, I found out the administrators actually hold the purse strings. And so it's like, there's more power there. So I became an administrator. I worked at Haskell. I went and worked at Fort Peck Community College at one point, and I worked there at Aaniiih and Nakoda College. But it's, we can get the very best education at tribal colleges. You know, if we, you know, if we, the instructors, I mean, the resources are there. It's just like when I said I felt like I had worked really hard because I was missing high school. We have all those resources right there in every course that we take as in college. If we read everything and engage with our instructors, we will have the best education that you could possibly get, and it's relevant to us. When I hear people saying, "Oh, you know, I've been accepted into this Ivy League school," it's like, that's wonderful, but you know, what happens to that Native perspective? You know, how there's no way that you're going to integrate those when you're isolated by yourself at those Ivy League schools. But here's an opportunity to be able to learn in a way that's totally relevant to who you are as a Native person. And you know, just to be clear, Sean, we don't do this by ourselves. We don't, you know, my mother was strongly encouraged always, and she came to my graduation. The only graduation I ever, ceremony that I attended was for my doctorate, because my mother was going to be there. And I actually fulfilled that promise to her. But I mean, there's so many people that were helpful, that advised. Jesse James Holly, who recently passed away, was a student when I first went to college, and she and she invited me to her home. I remember Becky as a child. I know her children. And she just, she saw me as a scared little res girl that came to college, and she did what she could. I mentioned Robert Swan. He too really gave a lot of latitude and had high expectations, and people worked hard for him. So there's lots of people along the way that help. And I couldn't begin to name everybody that helped me. And we have to be ready to reach out and ask for that help too. So I really thank you for inviting me, and I do hope that the story I shared, it does prove to be helpful.
Yeah, and I'm honored to hear your story, and I thank you for sitting down and being interviewed. And I do have to say, there's only two women that I was always really afraid of, and whenever they told me to do something, I did it. And that was one was my mom, and the other was you.
Now you tell me.
Yeah, so.
Now you tell me. You should have told me that when I was working there.
Yeah, well, I always did everything you said, so.
That's true. That's true. Well, I don't mean to inspire fear. I want.
Yeah, yeah. Well, sometimes people need that too. So.
Yeah. Well, I found out after I grew up, after my siblings all grew up, because I'm the oldest of 10, and my siblings told me later that they used to call me the little general when we were kids. I guess I used to have them march around and do their chores.
Yeah. I think I met one of your younger sisters, and I think she said that too. We were talking.
Oh, did she? Yeah, she worked for the immersion program for a little bit as a teacher.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, over here in Chandler.
Well, I know. Yeah. Well, yeah. We were about an hour. We were on almost.
Yeah.
You didn't think you would take an hour, and you did. So. But,
I said I would not take more than an hour. So.
But well, we thank you again, and until next time.
Doug Shaka.
Duncan Ahban.